Hey everyone, welcome back to SuperSimplified, the place where we turn complicated history into something even your cat would understand. My cat, Bartholomew, just informed me that he prefers the Spartan phalanx formation, which, honestly, checks out. Before we dive into a war that was basically the ancient Greek version of a catastrophic family feud, let us know in the comments, where in the world are you watching from? Are you chilling in glorious Athens, or maybe practicing your spear thrusts in Sparta? Drop us a comment, and while you're at it, hit that like button faster than an Athenian trireme cuts through the Aegean, and subscribe so you don't miss out on more history that's anything but dusty. Alright, imagine a group of people who are incredibly talented, wildly ambitious, and share a language, a religion, and a deep, deep sense of rivalry. We're talking about the ancient Greek city-states. They had just pulled off one of history's greatest underdog victories against the massive Persian Empire in the Persian Wars. They were feeling invincible, like they had just beaten the final boss on the highest difficulty setting. But here's the thing about success, it tends to breed jealousy and tension. The Greeks were free, but now they had a new problem. Who was going to be the boss of all the free Greeks? They had two main contenders, two absolute heavyweights, Athens and Sparta. Athens was the brainy one. The city of thinkers, artists, philosophers, and, crucially, a massive navy. They were all about democracy, culture, and building stunning temples. Their power was based on the Delian League, a massive naval alliance that, let's be honest, they pretty much ran as their own personal empire. Think of them as the dazzling, loud, liberal coastal city that loves innovation and shows off its wealth. Sparta was the brawny one, the city of disciplined soldiers, iron will, and minimal chit-chat. They were an oligarchy, ruled by a few, and their society was built entirely around the military. No poetry, no drama, just six-pack ABS and a spear. Their power was centered on the Peloponnesian League, an alliance of land-based powers who were mostly terrified of them. Think of them as the stoic, traditionalist military superpower that frowns upon excessive conversation. These two were never going to be best friends. They were fundamentally different, and their power structures were bound to clash. As the historian Thucydides famously put it, the real cause of the war was the growth of Athenian power and the fear which this caused in Sparta. It's a timeless lesson. Fear of the opancomer often starts the fight. The initial flashpoint, however, started with smaller, less significant feuds. It was like a medieval group chat meltdown, but with fleets of ships and city sieges. Key squabbles involved places like Corcyra and Potidaea, but the real catalyst came with Megara. Athens, trying to flex its economic muscles, imposed a brutal trade embargo on Megara, a Spartan ally. This was the equivalent of one superpower telling a rival's friend they're banned from buying milk. Sparta saw this as a direct challenge, and the diplomatic path quickly dissolved into a series of increasingly aggressive ultimatums. In 431 BC, the whole thing exploded. This wasn't going to be a quick skirmish. This was going to be a generations-long, brutal struggle for dominance. Athens had a plan, largely guided by its magnetic leader, Pericles. He was the ultimate Athenian statesman, brilliant, charismatic, and a phenomenal orator. Pericles' strategy was simple, if deeply frustrating to the Athenian people: don't fight the Spartans on land. The Spartans were the unquestioned kings of the land battle. Trying to beat them there was like trying to win a swimming race against a shark. Instead, Pericles decided to retreat everyone inside the famous long walls of Athens. These massive fortifications connected the city to its port, Piraeus, making the whole city-port complex one gigantic, impregnable fortress. They would let the Spartans march into Attica, burn the crops, and generally make a nuisance of themselves, but Athens would just sit tight. Why? Because Athens had the navy. Their plan was to import all their food and supplies by sea and use their naval supremacy to harass Spartan allies and raid the Peloponnesian coast. It was a strategy of attrition. You can't starve us, but we'll slowly bleed your allies dry. The Spartans, meanwhile, were confused. They were programmed for the decisive hoplite battle, the face-to-face clash that decided everything. Marching into Attica and burning olive trees felt deeply unsatisfying. It was like they brought a tank to a boat race. Their strategy was basically, if we burn enough stuff, they'll come out and fight, right? Wrong. The first phase of the war, often called the Archidamian War after the Spartan king Archidamus II, settled into a predictable cycle. Every spring, the Spartan army would march into Athenian territory, and every time, the Athenians would just wave at them from atop the walls. It was a stalemate of contrasting strengths, an unstoppable force Spartan army meeting an immovable object Athenian walls and navy. But history loves a cruel twist, and this war's twist came in the form of a tiny, invisible killer, the plague of Athens. In 430 BC, a devastating epidemic, probably typhus or smallpox, broke out in the overcrowded city. Remember how Pericles gathered everyone inside the walls for safety? Well, it turned into a massive, disease-ridden pressure cooker. This plague was horrific, killing an estimated one-third of the population, including the brilliant Pericles himself. Pericles' death was a colossal blow, perhaps the most damaging single event for Athens in the entire war. He was the anchor, the strategic mind. After him, Athenian leadership descended into a populist mess, driven by demagogues, fiery, aggressive speakers who replaced careful strategy with crowd-pleasing warmongering. The two biggest examples were Cleon, a relentless hawkish tanner, and Nicias, a wealthy, cautious aristocrat. It was like replacing a seasoned CEO with a screaming hype man and a nervous accountant. Despite the chaos, Athens had some major successes. In 425 BC, at the Battle of Pylos and Spectaria, the Athenians managed to trap and capture over 100 Spartan hoplites. This was more than just a military victory. It was a psychological earthquake. Spartans were not supposed to surrender. This capture gave Athens immense leverage and led to a temporary truce. The war dragged on until 421 BC, when, exhausted and recognizing the stalemate, both sides signed the Peace of Nicias. Named after the moderate Athenian general who pushed for it, this treaty was supposed to last for 50 years. Everyone breathed a collective sigh of relief, thinking the nightmare was over. They were adorably naive. The peace lasted only a few nervous years. The truth is, neither side truly honored the terms, and the growing, arrogant ambitions of a new, young Athenian figure were about to toss the treaty into the nearest ditch. Enter Alcibiades. If you were casting a historical drama, Alcibiades would be the reckless, glamorous, and utterly self-obsessed star. He was immensely wealthy, dazzlingly handsome, brilliant, and completely untrustworthy. He was basically the rock star of ancient Athens, known for his crazy parties and even crazier political maneuvering. Alcibiades hated the Peace of Nicias and wanted a spectacular, history-making victory to cement his own fame. He convinced the Athenians to launch one of the most hubristic, over-the-top military adventures in history, the Sicilian expedition for 15 to 413 BC. Sicily, specifically the powerful city of Syracuse, was far away, controlled vast resources, and was not directly involved in the war. Alcibiades painted a picture of quick riches and easy conquest. Nicias, the cautious old general, argued vehemently against it, warning it was a fool's errand. But Alcibiades was persuasive, and the lure of easy glory was too strong for the volatile Athenian assembly. They launched an enormous fleet, over 130 triremes and tens of thousands of men, a fleet so vast that, according to Thucydides, it was the most costly and splendidly equipped force that had ever set sail from a single Hellenic city. It was a disaster from start to finish. Just as the fleet set sail, Alcibiades was recalled to Athens to face charges of sacrilege for allegedly defacing religious statues. Rather than face trial, he did what any self-respecting rogue would do: he defected to Sparta. Yes, the brilliant Athenian general went to the enemy and gave them the single best piece of strategic advice possible: send a general and reinforcements to Syracuse immediately. The siege of Syracuse turned into a meat grinder. The Spartans, led by the astute general Gylippus, fortified the city. The Athenians, commanded by the reluctant Nicias, found themselves trapped, their supply lines cut. In a series of crushing land and sea battles, the Athenian forces were annihilated. The fleet was destroyed, and the entire army was captured and sent to suffer and die in the terrible stone quarries of Syracuse. The Sicilian expedition was not just a defeat, it was a near-mortal wound. It cost Athens a massive percentage of its fighting force, its treasury, and its faith in its own leadership. The final phase of the war, the Thessalian War for 1304 BC, was essentially a slow, agonizing death for Athens. Sparta, galvanized by the Sicilian victory and aided by the treacherous advice of Alcibiades, occupied a fortress at Thessaly in Attica, just miles from Athens. This was a strategic masterstroke. It was like setting up a permanent military base right outside the enemy's front door. It cut off Athens' land-based food supply, forced the Athenians to rely entirely on the sea, and allowed over 20,000 Athenian slaves to escape, crippling their economy. Crucially, Sparta finally decided to compete with Athens where it hurt the most, the sea. They started building a fleet, financed by their new best friends, the Persians. Yes, the Greeks, who had fought so hard to repel the Persians, were now taking Persian gold to fight each other. History is messy like that. The war at sea became brutal. Alcibiades, having been briefly rejected by the Spartans because they didn't trust him either, shocker, returned to Athens in a dazzling comeback, winning a few key naval battles and briefly restoring Athenian hope. But his political volatility was his undoing, and he was soon exiled again. The final act belongs to the brilliant, often ruthless, Spartan general Lysander. Lysander was a naval prodigy, which was unheard of for a Spartan. He secured a decisive victory for Sparta in 405 BC at the Battle of Aegospotami. The Athenian fleet, which had sailed into a terrible strategic position, was caught completely by surprise and annihilated. Only a handful of ships escaped. With its entire navy gone, its food supply cut, and surrounded by its enemies, Athens had run out of options. The long walls, once a symbol of defiance, now became a cage. In 404 BC, Athens officially surrendered. The terms of the surrender were harsh, but not completely obliterating. Sparta demanded the dismantling of the long walls and the surrender of almost all the remaining Athenian ships. They also insisted that Athens abandon its democracy and adopt an oligarchy. The oligarchic regime installed by Sparta was known as the 30 Tyrants. It was a short, brutal reign of terror where the oligarchs, backed by Spartan power, executed and exiled hundreds of citizens. It was the historical equivalent of the worst possible cleanup crew after a party. Eventually, a group of Athenian Democrats fought back, overthrew the tyrants, and restored a fragile democracy, but the damage was done. The Peloponnesian War profoundly reshaped the Greek world. It didn't just decide which city was the most powerful. It changed the very nature of Greek warfare, politics, and morality. The golden age of Athens was over, the dazzling culture remained, but the political and military might was broken. The confidence and unity of the Greek city-states were shattered. Constant fighting between the city-states continued for decades, a vicious cycle of Spartan, then Theban, then eventually another power's dominance, all while the various powers fought for control. The war also ushered in a period of intense cynicism. The idealism of Pericles' golden age was replaced by the pragmatism and ruthlessness that the war required. The brutal tactics, the massacres of non-combatants, and the overall savagery eroded the moral framework of Greek society. The ultimate legacy of the war is its vacuum. The constant internal fighting left all the major Greek city-states exhausted and weak, paving the way for a power from the north to rise and take control, the Kingdom of Macedon, under Philip II and later, his son, Alexander the Great. The war that was meant to determine the ruler of Greece instead guaranteed that a non-Greek power would eventually rule them all. The Peloponnesian War is a masterclass in the dangers of unchecked ambition, the fragility of alliances, and the devastating cost of a protracted conflict. It's a reminder that sometimes, the greatest enemy is the hubris that comes after a great success. Athens and Sparta, two giants, battled so fiercely that they ultimately weakened the very civilization they were fighting to lead. It was a victory for Sparta, yes, but a loss for the Greek world as a whole. So, what do you think? Was the war inevitable, or could a cooler head have prevailed? Was Alcibiades a brilliant tactician, or just a self-serving disaster waiting to happen? Let us know in the comments. Don't forget to hit like, share it with your favorite history nerd, and subscribe for more super simplified stories that turn epic conflicts into simple truths. Until next time, keep exploring the past, because even the best empires can make the worst decisions.